November 6, 1978. President Jimmy Carter signs the Revenue Act of 1978 into law. The bill is enormous, hundreds of pages, dozens of provisions. Most of it is unremarkable adjustments to corporate tax rates and capital gains brackets. Buried inside that bill is a single new section. Section 401, paragraph K. It is 869 words long. It addresses a narrow technical question about how executives at large corporations can defer a portion of their bonus compensation to reduce their immediate tax burden. The provision is so obscure that the lawmakers who voted on the bill barely discuss it. The press does not cover it. The American public has no idea it exists. 2 years later, a benefits consultant named Ted Benna will look at that paragraph, recognize a possibility nobody else has noticed, and quietly begin engineering the system that will eventually replace the American pension. He did not intend to dismantle retirement security for an entire country. He thought he was solving a small tax problem for a single client. This is the story of how a paragraph designed to give bonus deferrals to corporate executives became the primary retirement vehicle for over 70 million Americans, and why the system you depend on to fund the last 20 years of your life was never designed to do that. To understand what 1978 changed, you have to understand what came before it. For most of the 20th century, retirement in America was funded by something called a defined benefit pension. The structure was simple. You worked for a company for 30 or 40 years. The company set aside money on your behalf, professionally invested it, and guaranteed you a specific monthly payment for the rest of your life, starting at retirement. The risk sat with the company. The promise was permanent. You did not have to know how to invest. You did not have to manage market timing. You did not have to calculate withdrawal rates. The company hired actuaries and fund managers to handle all of that for you. And the result was a check that arrived every month until you died. In 1980, roughly 60% of private sector workers in America were covered by a defined benefit pension. By 2020, that number had collapsed to around 15%. In the same period, 401k coverage exploded from almost nothing to more than 60 million accounts, holding over $7 trillion in assets. That transition did not happen through legislation. There was no congressional debate about whether to dismantle the American pension system. There was no public referendum on whether retirement should be privatized. It happened because of a paragraph almost nobody read in 1978, and a benefits consultant in 1980 who saw what could be built with it. Ted Benna was a vice president at a small benefits consulting firm in Pennsylvania. In 1980, he was working with a banking client who wanted to redesign its bonus deferral program for executives. As he was reviewing the recently passed Section 401k, Benna noticed something the original drafters had not anticipated. The provision allowed employees to defer a portion of their pre-tax compensation. The deferred money could be matched by the employer. The combined contribution could grow tax-free until withdrawal. The original intent had been to let highly compensated executives defer year-end cash bonuses. But the language Benna was reading did not actually limit the provision to bonuses. It did not limit it to executives. It did not even require the deferred income to come from a discretionary payment. What Benna realized was this: the language permitted any employee at any income level to defer a portion of their regular salary into a tax-advantaged account. With employer matching, that grew tax-free until retirement. He proposed it to his client. The client deferred. So Benna implemented the design at his own firm in January of 1981. By the next year, the IRS had issued formal regulations confirming his interpretation was legal. By the mid-1980s, hundreds of corporations had launched 401k plans of their own. What corporations recognized almost immediately was that 401k plans cost dramatically less than defined benefit pensions. Pensions required actuarial valuations, professional management, and a guaranteed payout obligation that sat on the corporate balance sheet for decades. 401k plans required none of this. The contribution was capped. The investment risk transferred to the employee. The administrative burden was minimal. For corporate America, the 401k was not a retirement innovation. It was a liability transfer. By the 1990s, the transition was effectively complete. New employees at most large companies were no longer offered pensions. They were offered a 401k with an employer match, a list of mutual fund options, and a brochure explaining that they were now responsible for managing their own retirement. 40+ years later, the data on how that experiment has worked is unambiguous. The Federal Reserve's most recent survey of consumer finances shows that the median 401k balance for Americans aged 55 to 64, the cohort approaching retirement, is approximately $87,000. The average is higher because a small number of high balance accounts skew the mean, but the median is what matters. Half of all Americans approaching retirement have less than $87,000 saved in their primary retirement vehicle. Using the standard 4% withdrawal rule, an $87,000 balance generates roughly $3,500 of annual income per year. Combined with the average Social Security benefit of around $22,000, the typical near-retirement American is looking at total retirement income of approximately $25,500 per year. The cost of living for a single retiree in most American metropolitan areas exceeds $35,000 per year. In high-cost states, it exceeds $50,000. The math does not work, and it is not failing because Americans are uniquely bad at saving. It is failing because the system was never designed to fund retirement for ordinary workers in the first place. Ted Benna himself, the man widely credited as the father of the 401k, said in interviews late in his career that he believed the system had become a, quote, monster. He said it had grown beyond what he ever envisioned. He said he sometimes wished it had never been created in its current form. He pointed to the complexity, the high fees, the volatile outcomes, and the fact that ordinary workers were being asked to make sophisticated investment decisions they were never trained to make. The architecture had been engineered for a different purpose. It was being used for something it was never built to do. There is a deeper structural reason the 401k system produces the outcomes it does. It transfers 4 distinct burdens from institutions to individuals. The first is investment selection. A pension fund had professional managers choosing investments based on actuarial requirements. A 401k participant has a list of mutual fund options and is expected to choose among them with no formal training. The second is market timing risk. A pension paid out a fixed monthly amount, regardless of market conditions. A 401k participant who retires during a market downturn, which is what happened to millions of Americans in 2008. And again, during the 2020 volatility, sees their effective retirement income permanently reduced. The third is longevity risk. a pension paid until death. A 401k holder has to estimate how long they will live and divide their savings accordingly. Estimate too low, and the money runs out. Estimate too high, and they live below their means for decades. The fourth is fee-out burden. Pension funds negotiated institutional fee rates measured in basis points. 401k plans have historically charged retail fees that compound across decades into hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost retirement value per participant. Each of these is a burden that used to sit on a corporate balance sheet. Each of them now sits on yours. This is what the transition from defined benefit to defined contribution actually accomplished. It did not modernize retirement. It did not give workers more control. It transferred the risks and costs of an aging workforce off the corporate ledger and onto the individual ledger. At exactly the moment when wages were no longer keeping up with productivity, when housing costs were beginning their post-1971 ascent, and when consumer debt was rising to fill the gap, the 401k did not just fail to replace the pension. It replaced a guaranteed system with a self-funded one at the precise historical moment when most workers had less margin to self-fund anything. Understanding 1978 does not give you a way to recover what the pension provided. That system is gone for the overwhelming majority of American workers and is not coming back. The defined benefit obligation has been priced out of corporate America permanently. But understanding 1978 changes what you do with the system that exists. It means recognizing that the 401k is not a retirement plan. It is a tax-advantaged savings account that you, personally, are responsible for converting into retirement income through investment selection, market timing, longevity estimation, and fee management, all of which were professional functions in the pension era. It means recognizing that an employer match is not a benefit in the traditional sense. It is a partial offset for a liability that used to sit entirely with the employer. It means recognizing that the standard advice, max your 401k, trust the long-term market, withdraw 4% per year, is not a strategy. It is a heuristic developed because the actual answer, which is that most Americans cannot fund a 30-year retirement on the contribution caps available to them, is too uncomfortable to state plainly. And it means recognizing that for most Americans, the 401k alone is structurally insufficient. The system that replaced the pension was designed as a supplement. It became a primary because corporations stopped offering the alternative. The math of treating a supplement as a primary does not balance, and it hasn't balanced for most workers in any of the 4 decades since the transition began. This is not a failure of personal responsibility. It is the predictable outcome of an architecture built for one purpose being repurposed for another. The Revenue Act of 1978 contained 869 words that were never supposed to redefine American retirement. They did anyway. And 47 years later, the system built on those 869 words is still the primary mechanism by which most Americans are expected to fund the last 20 years of their lives. A paragraph nobody read. A consultant who saw what nobody else saw. A liability transfer disguised as a benefit. And a country still operating under the consequences without ever having voted on the design. Next week, 1986. The Tax Reform Act that simplified the tax code, lowered the top marginal rate from 50% to 28%, and quietly created the first generation of American billionaires who would never pay the rates their predecessors paid. The reform that was sold as fairness and delivered something else. Subscribe. You are going to want to see it.